Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining this session about incentivizing pump storage development, policies, and market frameworks. I'm Pierre Marx. I'm the General Manager for Hydro in North America at GE Renewable. As you saw, a few housekeeping rules. The one that I want to highlight is I encourage you to use the Q&A buttons. If you have a question, our panelists will answer your question directly in the chat, and we might have some time at the end of the session to cover a few questions live. First, I would like to thank the IHA for organizing this forum and also for giving GE the opportunity to lead the working group on policy and market in the frame of the International Forum on Pump Hydro Storage. At GE, we strongly believe that pump storage is the proven, renewable, and most cost-effective large-scale energy storage solution to ensure a smooth energy transition. Today, drawing on findings from the Policy and Market Frameworks Working Group, we will explore the various policies and markets to highlight the current investment barriers, but also emerging opportunities for pump storage development. I'm pleased to have with me today a number of experts from across the globe who will be able to share their insight on pump storage development. To the expert, if you can switch on your camera now. So we have Dr. Judith Plummer-Brickman, Senior Research Associate, Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. We have Anna Clapham, Head of Electricity Storage, UK Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Together with us also Santiago Rivas Navarro, Senior Market Analyst at Alpic. Professor Arun Kumar, Civil Engineer, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee. Cameron Schilling, Vice President of Market Strategies and Regulatory Affairs, National Hydropower Association. And also José Fernando Prada, Expert Commissioner, Colombia Comisión de Regulación de Energía, IGAS. I will start by a short introduction before discussing with our various speakers. I will give an overview of the context. What is the role of energy storage, particularly pump storage, in the energy transition, and what are the major challenges it faces in its development? Energy transition is ongoing globally and even accelerating to meet the COP21 climate goals defined in 2015 in the Paris Agreement. More and more countries are joining the net zero emission club. On one side, the increase of green, variable, renewable sources. On the other, the retirement of fossil fuel power plants that were providing services to the grid is putting a lot of challenge on grid resiliency. Challenge for the network in terms of power quality, but also energy management. So storage solutions are required to enable the smooth energy transition, and pump storage is, in our view, a key enabler. Pump storage is the best large-scale energy storage solution. It has already been playing this role for decades, providing services from reactive power, support to frequency, inertia, black start capabilities. And with new technologies, we are allowing for faster and wider operating ranges, providing additional flexibility and stability as these services. So why is large-scale, long-duration storage needed? Well, it's basically to accommodate the fact that the wind can stop blowing and the sun can stop shining, right? And you have a long period where many hours, sometimes days, where you have a lack of this generation or firm, massive volumes of variable renewable energy that will come online. And to offset that, to balance that, you need large amount of storage, which can be provided by pump storage. Today, 250 pump storage stations are currently in operation. As you can see on the graph on the right part of this page, the majority has a discharge duration longer than 6 hours, and some are capable of seasonal storage. It also has a long lifetime. I mean, we're talking about being sustainable here. We need to think about long-term. We need to think about cost-effective solution. And we think that pump storage is the most effective, cost-effective solution in the long run. If we go to the next page, Many pump storage projects are currently under development globally. Most of the region, you can see it on the map, have a huge potential to develop new pump storage projects. You can see that the split between the gray and the blue, which basically is the split between the projects in development in gray and the project in construction in blue, or the split between the potential on one side and the actual materialization of this potential is very much towards the gray today. Most of the projects that are currently under construction are in China, a couple more in Europe, Switzerland, Austria, in Australia, and a little bit in the Middle East. Most of the recent developments are led by government or public funded utilities, either in regulated or deregulated markets. So the main challenge for pump storage today is the profitability of projects and the need for stable economic signals to build a business case for new development. As for any long-term investment, right? The lack of visibility of the energy market is a strong barrier. Those barriers to the development of the new projects need to be removed. We'll talk about that today. And in addition, it is important to ensure that regulatory and market conditions allow existing assets to perform optimally. Going to the next page, launched in November 2020 by the International Hydropower Association and chaired by the US Department of Energy, the forum, which we're sitting in today, brings together 13 governments, over 80 organizations, including industry, financial institutions, academia, NGOs, to share their experiences and build best practices. So bringing together the different stakeholders to share their experience and best practices through this international forum is critical to move fast and enable good conditions for the development of pumped hydro storage. The forum is needed to help address at a government level where the policies are devised, the key challenges facing the development of the technology. On the next page, we see that to tackle common barriers for pump storage development, the International Forum on Pump Storage Hydropower established a policy and market frameworks working group that GE Renewable Energy had the chance to lead. So with the support of over 20 organizations covering all regions and all topics, the working group has developed a global position paper which addresses the common market, policy and investment barriers and provides recommendations for government and regulators, as well as tailored country and region specific recommendation paper. These papers will be released on September 16. And today, with the panelists that I introduced a bit earlier, we propose to give you a little bit of a sneak peek and raise your interest about reading that paper when it gets out on the 16th of September. I'll turn in a moment to the different invitees and they will provide their input on the current situation or the status of pump storage in their region. They will talk about the current government and regulatory policy related to long duration storage. They will cover also the potential barriers at the regional and national level, as well as opportunities for expansion for pump storage. They will also cover potential recommendations to increase the deployment of pump storage within view the will to give you a wish to open these papers on the 16th of September. Without further delay, I would like to go in starting the panel, and I will go in a first round of questions that will focus more on challenges and opportunities. And I'll start with the US, Cameron. Most observers agree that we will need long duration storage to meet our climate goals, but how do we send a strong signal for that need?
Well, great. Pierre, thank you for the introduction and the invitation. The National Hydropower Association is excited to be a part of this forum, and I look forward to learning from others on this topic. You're right, storage is going to be a key part of a climate solution. And without it, I think it's going to be too difficult to balance the variability that you spoke of renewables. I think even if you consider that you have a robust transmission build out, you're still going to need storage as a key part of the solution. Okay, so we need it. We can all agree, and the utilities are already investing. New wind and solar and batteries are being deployed given the low upfront costs and the short lead time. I think in the United States, about 40% of the interconnection queue is made up of these hybrid resources, either solar plus batteries or wind plus batteries. But while 4-hour batteries will play a vital role in the transition, it's no substitute for long duration storage. And here we're not seeing much deployment at all. So I was going to talk a little bit about the challenges. Why is that? Partly because of the initial costs. Batteries are cheap and the costs are declining, and they're relatively easy to site and build. So it makes sense if utilities are choosing to build these resources because it's kind of the low-hanging fruit of the storage deployments. Also in the United States, we have about 60% of our consumers in the US live in a restructured market where the energy is dispatched on least cost, and the regulators kind of have less of a say in what resources get built and where they get built. Instead, in these areas of the country, we rely on markets for their short-run prices, and in some instances, those markets have capacity markets. And those markets are really good for least cost dispatching, but have proven difficult to send the signal for long duration storage, like pump storage. We also think the services, the ancillary services, the reliability services tend to be undervalued, in some cases uncompensated. And we think that we could do a better job of getting market design to better price these values that we all know we're going to need in a low carbon grid. In the other areas of the country where the non-restructured or ISO areas, the regulator is in charge and has a bigger role in telling utilities what and where to build. That's both a positive and a negative. It's positive because I think it's a better forum for these resources to compete. But I think the negative is that there's a mismatch between the timing and the need, because most IRP procurements look at shorter term challenges that may not match the development timeline for a pump storage project. So to your original question, how do we incent long duration storage? I think we do it the same way we incented renewables. We set targets that are competitively neutral, so all storage resources can compete to meet the need. We mentioned this in the US paper. And right now we have several states that have energy storage targets, but because of the way the target is structured, it either prohibits pump storage either implicitly or explicitly. So I'll just say, I think well-designed, competitively neutral long duration targets could allow pump storage to meet this need both cost effectively and reliably.
Thanks a lot, Cameron. I'll turn now to Europe. Santiago Rivas Navarro, could you give us a bit of situation in Europe? What is the current situation of pump storage? What are the risks? What are the opportunities?
Yeah. Hi everybody. So the main current problem of pump storage in Europe is that despite being acknowledged as a key technology for the decarbonization and the energy transition, we can see that in the energy plans, on the strategic plans of many countries, current market conditions do not allow pump storage from being profitable. And as a consequence, many projects that had been announced in the beginning of last decade have been frozen or even abandoned. The energy transition and the renewable development is a great opportunity for energy storage, including pump storage. But the main risk, in my opinion, is the competition from other flexible sources and other storage systems like batteries. Because pump storage has some particularities that have been already mentioned. So that requires usually heavy capital investment, long paybacks, long construction time. And these characteristics, they may make them not competitive against other solutions. So also you have to keep in mind that European power system is structured as an open market. So any public support mechanism for pump storage or other technologies must comply with fair competition regulation. So as I say, the difficulties is that the market conditions are not great, and we have so in the discussion in the paper we have tried as well to find what kind of solutions we can find to cope with this risk in the future.
Thank you, Santiago. Turning now to UK with Hannah from the UK government. Could you tell us a bit more about the 2021 Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan and the call for evidence and facilitating the deployment of large-scale, long-duration storage?
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much, Pierre. And yeah, good to be here speaking to you all. So in the UK, earlier this year, so in July, we published a new Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. And so this follows on from a publication that we did in 2017 and sets out a vision, analysis and kind of work programme for delivering a smart and flexible electricity system, so which is needed for kind of underpinning our energy security and the transition to net zero, which we have set out in legislation. So this kind of future energy system will need significant levels of flexibility, as I kind of think we're all agreed upon, and utilisation of smart technologies so that it can run almost entirely on kind of low carbon energy sources. So in this new Smart Systems Plan, we, as I mentioned, we set out some new analysis. And so this demonstrated that deploying sources of flexibility such as energy storage, demand-side response and interconnection to other countries could save up to 10 billion per year by 2050. So significant kind of system savings that we need to unlock through our work programme. As kind of lots of people have mentioned already, electricity storage is an essential source of flexibility. And within this document, this kind of plan, we have set out a range of actions that we will take alongside Ofgem, who are our energy regulator in the UK, and also working really closely with industry, so some actions in there for industry to facilitate the deployment of storage at all scales. And so our vision is to create a best-in-class regulatory framework for storage, and that's by removing barriers, reforming markets and investing in innovation. And so one of the areas of focus in this new Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan is large-scale and long-duration storage. So we've done lots of engagement with industry kind of in the run-up to this plan as we've been pulling it all together, working really closely to understand where we need to prioritise, what actions are needed to be taken. And so through this engagement, we've kind of understood the barriers in greater detail that are kind of faced by large-scale and long-duration storage currently. So we recognise the role that this type of storage could play in kind of helping to manage that variation in generation and demand. However, we do need to understand that in greater detail, and that's why in the plan we have set out an action to commission analysis to model the system need and role of large-scale and long-duration storage. And so this is in progress at the moment, this action and this piece of analysis. Further to this, kind of through the engagement, we identified that one of the key barriers, which is again already been talked about, is a financing challenge. So technologies at this scale, they have the high upfront costs, can take longer to construct or carry risks associated with investing in nascent technologies. So many of the technologies that might be able to provide long duration storage are novel or have not kind of been deployed at scale yet. And then these factors, when you take these different things and combine them with kind of difficult to forecast revenue streams due to the merchant nature of storage investments in the UK, mean that storage at this scale just struggles to attract the investment that it requires. There are a range of reforms already happening in the UK to our markets, which we think can support the investment case for this type of storage. However, alongside these reforms, we are exploring further the kind of need and case for more fundamental market intervention to support the deployment of these technologies and address this financing challenge that I just talked about. So we have published a call for evidence alongside the new Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which is specifically on facilitating the deployment of large-scale and long-duration storage. And so this is seeking evidence from industry on the barriers faced by these technologies, making sure that we have fully understood the barriers from our engagement so far, what intervention might be kind of suitable to address these barriers, as well as the risks associated with intervening. And so it's kind of alongside this analysis that we will determine our next steps in this space.
About those next steps, any further detail or calendar you want to share on these next steps?
Sure. So yeah, we will be analysing the responses to our call for evidence, and considering these alongside the outputs of the economic modelling, which I referred to earlier. And these together will shape our kind of next steps and decisions. We are aiming to respond to the call for evidence in early 2022.
Thank you very much. I'm now continuing around the world, going to India with Professor Arun Kumar. India is one of the fastest emerging markets of electricity, right? So what may be the reason that the private investment in pumped storage development is still very low?
I request that a slide which I just prepared could be shown, but slide please. In fact, this particular matter about pumped storage is for quite some time happening, and it's talking about that what should be there and why it's not happening, and especially the private sector is not coming up. So in fact, in the month of January, February, all of us sat down a couple of times, all stakeholders. And just to give a context of Indian, that we have about 375 gigawatt capacity, where we have a lot of sites for PSPs, but the examples wise is only 4785 megawatt have been commissioned, and out of that even 1500 is not running in the pump storage mode due to various challenges. And there are many sites which have been identified. They are under various stages of clearances. But let me tell you the problems which the PSP or as a typical hydro, but PSP especially faces, that there are regulatory tariff regime. It's not at the moment safe. It's a big challenge. Evaluation of the roles, what is being played by the PSP is in the grid stability and reliability and security service is not evaluated properly. There are not compensation or any compensation for the tariff regime which is there at the moment, and this is one of the reason. And similarly, when you talk about taking the clearances of taking the government from the different departments, their consents, concurrence, etc., it takes time, because a typical hydropower, not much of difference has been seen in the pump storage scheme, even if it is off river, though experience for the off river has started very recently, not like other world. And also the bidding documents. So these are the some of the regions. I will also tell you, in hydropower, not more than 7% in the private sector even today. 7% is by and large. The hydro used to be a government entity, whether it's a federal government or whether it's a state government. So even today, all hydro and all so far, pump storage have been the government. Recently, when we're talking about penetration of solar and wind, recently 1200 megawatt capacity of pump storage is under construction, where they have a complete round-the-clock kind of electricity commitment, where the adequate compensation for the additional cost of the pump storage is being taken care, and that's why the 1200 megawatt kind of potential is coming up. In terms of potential, I just said that there are several sites. Even the government have identified more than 20,000 megawatt sites. Even the private sector have identified sites. But the policy support, regulatory support, and the true evaluation of the tariff which is going to be there from the pump storage is a need of hour. And also, let me tell you that this is a serious matter, and for the last 2-3 years, and of late from this year, the government is working very seriously, because if the project, private sector cannot wait for 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, kind of, which typically takes a hydropower project. If the same basket is there for pump storage, the private sector is not coming. But since solar and wind is coming, the private sector in a big way has this pump storage. I'm quite sure that it is going to see the day, because of solar and wind, the PSP will be a good event, and it has got a long hours, not like battery, which is less than 4 hours. So for 6 hours, 8 hours kind of assets. In fact, many times we have wind drought, we have solar drought. In that case, whatever the storage capacity, it is only the PSP will be the solution. And for that, I would like to say that there will be support required. And I think this is coming, but how fast is coming, let's see. This is one of the region that private sector is not in a big way, but I see that in next few years, this will be a totally turnaround picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going now to Africa with Dr. Janet Plummer-Breckman. Is pump storage an appropriate solution to the current challenges in Africa?
Thank you, Pierre. I think first you would have to say that we can't talk about Africa as one thing because there are too many different challenges. The interesting map that Pierre showed earlier, you will have noticed that the circle for Africa was tiny. There was just, there's about 3.4 gigawatts of installed capacity at the moment. And that's almost entirely in South Africa and Morocco. And really that, I think, tells us a lot about the appropriateness of pump storage for Africa, because it is the countries who are approaching full supply, approaching a 24-hour supply, or at least a commitment to a 24-hour supply, who feel the need of electricity storage. And so there are some countries who are in that position. There are some for whom they have sufficient large hydro that they can use a lot of their hydro to provide them with the flexibility they need to manage their renewables or whatever else they need to manage on the grid. And there are some countries who, to be perfectly honest, are still managing intermittent supply through blackouts. That is the only approach they've got. And whereas you would be perfectly reasonable in saying, well, in that case, they need pump storage. Yes, they do. But for some of those countries, if you had $500-600 million or $1 billion and you were going to make an investment in electricity, they need baseload more than they need pump storage at the moment. So very much depends on the situation, I would say. But certainly what you can say is that almost all of the countries are moving towards a higher level of intermittent renewables on their grids. And so over time, there will become a higher premium on storage in those countries. And but it's just in many instances, it's just not yet. It's not that it isn't appropriate, it's just that it's not yet appropriate. And in some ways you can turn that into a positive, because it means that those countries have got time to plan how they could make best use of their technological options and put in place the facilitation, which perhaps isn't there at the moment. But South Africa and Morocco are making really good use of pump storage. Morocco was well ahead of the game in this, and they have got a lot to demonstrate for other countries in the way of using this technology most effectively.
Thank you, Judith. Going to Colombia now with Jose Fernando. What are the opportunities and advantages that you see in Latin America for developing pump storage projects?
Thank you, Pierre, and thanks to the World Hydropower Congress and the International Forum on Pump Storage Hydropower for having me in this interesting panel. So regarding the question, I see many opportunities and advantages for long duration storage hydropower in Latin America. And the first I would like to mention is that the region has the resources, since hydro generation is an important part of the generation mix in many countries. In fact, hydro is the most relevant generation resource in several countries like Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica. So there are multiple reservoirs that can be repurposed to have long-term storage capabilities. And so in that sense, the region does not have to start from zero. Other important advantage is that there are well-developed wholesale electricity markets in many countries, both in South and Central America. And actually, the region was a pioneer on the deregulation movement in the 1990s. So I think this allows to introduce and price new market products and services that can be provided for storage systems. Markets create a level playing field for different technologies to compete and are an efficient vehicle to take advantage of private investment in new technologies and for innovation. I would also like to point out that in general, the region is in an early stage of integration of variable renewable energy into their electricity systems. So if you remember in one of the earlier slides, you could see our map showing a little circle for PSH development in the region, not very different to Africa. And it is true that we're starting to recognize the need for flexibility in our systems. But I must say, it is also true that this means it's the right time to plan for the role of long duration storage in the energy systems of the region and design the adequate policies and regulations that are both cost effective and to get maximum benefits from investment in pump storage hydropower. So I really do see it as an opportunity. I can think of some other opportunities, but it might be enough for now, given the time constraints. So back to you, Pierre. Thanks.
Thank you, Jose Fernando. But then that's on the opportunity side. Now, on the challenge side, besides financing, what other challenges do you see for advancing pump storage contribution to the energy integration in Latin America?
Yeah, so besides funding, besides getting the money to pay for these high capital investment projects and long lead times, I think one important challenge is sustainability. We need to ensure that these projects are going to be developed in a sustainable manner. And even more importantly, that we can communicate to all the stakeholders that there are sustainable projects and we can gain acceptance from the society, from the communities around the projects and all the people involved. I think actions like the new sustainability standard that is being presented in this Congress, it's a step forward on that direction. And the other important challenge is cost, and especially what customers have to pay for it. I mean, the impact on customer rates, because in some sense, customers have to pay for the investments at the end through customer rates, through public budget. So we need to ensure that investments are cost effective, are efficient, and that we have in place suitable risk-sharing mechanisms that not all the risks are going to be on the shoulders of the customers. So that I think it's also an important thing you have to take care. I think that's the two most important.
All right, sorry,
yes.
Sorry, I was struggling a bit with coming back with the video, switching it off and on, kind of struggle. Thank you, Jose Fernando. Before we get into a second round of questions more focused on the recommendation, I just want to remind all our participants that so you have a Q&A button where you can ask a few questions. Also for our panelists, you can answer those questions directly in the chat, Some of them are directly pointed to one of us, one of you, so don't hesitate to type an answer in, and we might have a few minutes at the end of the second round to cover a few questions live. Going into, so back to you, Cameron, on the US and pointing at recommendation. Of all the recommendation that everybody will discover in the paper on September 16th, which ones might provide the biggest impact for the development in the US, according to you?
Great, thank you, Pierre, for the question. I think several recommendations in our paper would have major impacts on pump storage deployment. Some would take a while to implement and for those effects to be felt. A good example, something that would have a good impact is the licensing process. We have about 70 projects that are in various stages of development, representing about 55 gigawatts of long duration storage. Most of those are in the West, where renewable penetration is the greatest. And currently we have 3 projects who are all past the entire licensing process, meaning they have all their authorizations from the federal regulator. The current process takes about 3 to 5 years and doesn't account for the differences between closed loop and open loop systems. So one recommendation we have is we need an expedited process for off-river or closed loop pump storage, recognizing that those environmental impacts are less or more benign. So this would make a huge difference. We were successful in reforming the closed loop licensing process in 2018 in Congress, but when that regulatory change came to FERC, our federal regulator, the way they implemented it did not provide for the greatest benefit. So basically, instead of streamlining the process, they truncated it. So you had the same amount of work to do on an even shorter timeline, which is one reason that no one has availed themselves of that process. So I think we need to take another look at streamlining off-river pump storage licensing. But I think by far the quickest and largest impact that we could have in the US is by passing an investment tax credit for all storage resources. Right now, we have a situation where some storage resources receive a 30% investment tax credit and most resources do not. So a good example of that is I mentioned that 40% of the interconnection queue in the United States is made up of hybrid resources. These are usually solar plus batteries or wind plus batteries. Many of those resources, because of the way the law is written in the US, can receive a 30% investment tax credit. So if you're a pump storage project and you're competing against a solar plus batteries facility in an IRP setting, you're competing against somebody who has a 30% cut on their costs. And so at the National Hydropower Association, we think it's important, it's vital that we get an investment tax credit for all storage resources, not just some. And right now there are proposals in Congress making their way through that would provide for a competitively neutral tax credit for all storage resources. And most of those proposals specifically call out pump storage as an eligible technology. I think that if we did that tomorrow, the effect would be immediate and very impactful. So, just in closing, I think the more we can develop competitively neutral policies for storage, the better off we'll be in terms of getting the long duration storage deployments like pump storage that we need.
Thanks, Cameron. Definitely, reducing the lead time, starting with the licensing, and then providing a financial incentive through tax support, all in the spirit of fair competition in the renewable market. I'm sure some of our other panelists will find that as key opportunities to develop pump storage. Going back to Europe, Santiago, what are the recommendations for governments, regulatory authorities, and European commissions to guarantee the development of pump storage?
Yeah, so all the recommendations that were gathered through the different European workshops, the different participants, all the recommendations aim to increase the profitability and the visibility of future revenues in order to encourage and support investors' decision. As I mentioned before, you have to keep in mind that any public support must be compatible with liberalized market, fair competition and state aid rules. And also any support mechanism for, if we want that it to be effective for pumped storage, must be designed so they take into account the pumped storage characteristics. That is, as we said before, particular heavy capex, so heavy capital investment, long construction time, and long payback. So some of the recommendations that were proposed, as I said, in the different workshops, were the introduction of new markets or products. So, for example, introduction of flexible capacity products, like, for example, flexibility options with several hours of minimum duration. That in order to avoid, let's say, the competition from batteries or for shorter period, shorter duration technologies. Another example is the introduction of appropriate long-term purchasing mechanism, like, for example, storage capacities auctions or winter reserves. Another product would be to remunerate the grid deferral. So that means that the fact that we install a pump storage that can save money on the extension of the grid, but that implies a change in how the regulated transmission assets are remunerated, and implies that the remuneration must be shared between the transmission operator and the pump storage operator. Another example is the remuneration of wider range of ancillaries or balancing services that are currently not remunerated or not correctly remunerated. And also introducing shorter market products like 15 minutes or less. So to encourage as well for these flexible options or flexible alternatives. Some other recommendations aim to remove some barriers. So, for example, allowing cross-border participation of pump storage in the different markets, and also assess the future system adequacy at a regional level, including cross-border pump storage operation. So these are, I would say, the most important recommendations that were, as I say, gathered in these European workshops.
Thank you very much, Santiago. So a lot around giving the investor a long-term visibility and profitability, working on the profitability of projects with different mechanisms, short-term, long-term remuneration of the services, ancillary services of some sort that pump storage is providing. Turning back to India, Professor Arun Kumar, what kind of policy and regulatory changes on the part of the government could initiate the growth of pump storage in India to support a higher or high renewable penetration?
I think it's a very nice question and at the very right time, because here the government has started working on the policy. I would like to again request that the slide of this, you can see that the government of India has a target of having 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2020 and 450 gigawatt by 2030 for decarbonization efforts, which has been committed by NDC. And recently the CA, our Central Executive Authority, has come out that we require about 26 gigawatt kind of storage, and obviously the pump storage would be one of them, a very strong contender. And recently also the government has announced that hydropower purchase obligation by the DISCOM purchasers, the electricity said about 2.8% must come from hydro. So there are very distinctly that interstate transmission charges now are being waived off. This is being considered in addition to the solar and wind. The interstate charges has been now waived off so that you can pump the water, you can charge in the battery. So that's one of the all ultimate aim or the target for the policymaker is that we should reduce the cost. We should reduce the cost of the storage. We also make this thing happen early, because everybody knows that in terms of PSP, which has got a longest 6 hours, 7 hours kind of storage, this is one of the best bet. And I would like to say that for policymakers, they have understood. And I think within a short time, policy should be announced, and the benefits of the PSP. So we are now well understood. And I would say that the flexibility approach of the PSP, one of the things also coming in a big way, that we should not announce only megawatt basis capacity. In fact, we should have the both way of templating or putting the nameplate of any PSP, that megawatt and megawatt hours, because many times megawatt hours, when requires ramping, that time megawatt is required. And once you have megawatt, if you don't have the megawatt hours, so both way that helps it. So I would like to say the government of India, first of all, it is waiving off the interstate transmission charges. That's a big one. And also making the transmission charges only applicable for one way, not that when you are drawing the power from when you are pumping, you using the pump as the power, and again you're generating. So the charges will be one of them only, like whatever the maximum you're doing. So you will be putting that charges only for that component. Similarly, the taxes, like we have a GST and maybe subvention of the interest, which can perhaps make this project relatively less expensive tariff wise, and also the RPO, renewable energy certificates purchase obligations, or those things can be also available to the pumped storage. And I would say that even making available funding to say capital or interest, the loan and capital equity could be increased. That means roughly 4:1. And our system operator like POSOCO will be managing the capacity by allocation properly, ancillaries. The regulatory commissions will be advised to have this a nice tariff for the pump storage. So I see a lot of future and readiness by the government of India, but these are under, I would say, finalization. Maybe a regulatory asset, also the grid assets. If it is a grid asset, what kind of tariff, what kind of costing has to be borne. So these things are under finalization, and I would say that very soon this advantage of PSP in terms of our availability will be available, and also this will be the readiness is there. So I think in next few years you will see the very low profile PSP in India will get a high profile. So we look forward to bright things, and because solar is coming in a big way, and this way it helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Besides the real financing part, which we talked a bit about earlier, I think one of the big highlight that you're putting is around treating pump storage as a transmission asset across borders with more interstate capabilities, and how we adjust tariffication financing to this aspect of being a transmission asset. Going back now to Africa with Judith, could you tell us about what legal and regulatory mechanisms are needed to support the development of pump storage?
Yes, thank you. I think that for some of the countries in Africa, the regulatory mechanisms are really at the most basic level, and we need to begin from the beginning with regulation. But building in regulation which deals with issues like the ancillary services on the grid, that deals with issues like time of day tariffs and the incentives for storage, are things which can be built in. And I think that the countries would do worse than look at the way that Morocco and South Africa have handled it, and build in these processes as they're developing their really nascent regulatory structures. I noticed that Hannah said that finance is quite a difficulty for PSH in Britain. And, if it's difficult for Britain, then it's really amazingly difficult for Africa. And I think that in order for any country to feel that it's worth putting everything in place to incentivize pump storage, they must also feel that there's even a chance that those projects will get financed. And I think the multilaterals have got a huge role to play in trying to make sure that that's the case. Also, given that some of these issues are likely to come into play in the next 10, 20 years, even longer, one of the things which is possible is to build in an option for pump storage into any other project which is already being planned as a hydropower project. So if when a project is built, there is consideration of the fact that at some time in the future, it may be necessary to retrofit it as pump storage, then that can be built into the design at the beginning. And that's a really useful way to make the later development of pump storage much more efficient. And along the same tack, there are projects which are already in existence to which it's possible to retrofit pump storage. So I don't think we have to consider that all of these projects necessarily need to be greenfield sites. And possibly even learning from the experience that they have in Australia of using previous sites of mines to create pump storage by reusing that space to create the upper and lower reservoir. So I think that what Africa needs is a hugely broad-minded approach to what pump storage is and how it can be facilitated, because for so many countries and so many different situations, there is a useful solution for each of them. And planning that now with the next 10, 20 years in mind is what will lead to a smoother transition, in many ways, a smoother transition than some of the existing countries have followed.
Thank you, Judith. I think it's really to the point, raising the consciousness of the need today and start acting today, because it's now that we have the leverage, to act and take these decisions, because those are long-term decisions that's going to take time to implement. So we need to act now. Gives me the opportunity to go into the public. I have quite a few questions coming from the audience. And we have not a long time left. I'll keep 2 minutes for the wrap up, but propose we're going 5 minutes of questions, maybe time to address a couple of them. I'll start with this one, which resonates with what you just said, Judith. Given the long lead time of pump storage and the urgency of accelerating the decarbonization of the power system, would it be reasonable to say that the role of pump storage is much less for the targets around 2030, but strategic for the net zero around 2050? In such context, in the coming 2 decades, would conventional hydro play a critical role for large-scale and long-duration storage? And if so, what would be critical issues for ramping up such potential for conventional hydro? That's probably a question for a bit everybody, but can I turn to Santiago maybe to start?
Yeah, yeah. I would say not really. For 2050. I mean, if you look at the different plans and the different papers presented by the different countries in Europe, they have targets to increase the storage, and in particular pump storage, by 2030. So in line with also the targets of renewable development. So it's really now that the investment decision should be taken, or in the next years, given the long time to be built. I wanted to say something else, but I just forget. Yeah, exactly, about the hydro. The problem in Europe, I would say, is that the hydro potential is a bit limited. So the new hydro potential is limited. So in that sense, hydro will, so existing hydro will continue, of course, to be a source of flexibility, probably the most important in Europe. But I don't think there is so much potential of new big dams to be developed. While on pumped storage, it could be, because exactly there are 16 dams that could be changed or upgraded to a pumped storage. Yeah, and that actually, as I said, this is something that the European countries are foreseen for 2030 already, not only 2050. Yeah.
Thank you, Santiago. Any other voice on this question, or Cameron?
Yeah, Pierre, thank you. On the 2030 versus 2050, I agree with Santiago. I think we're seeing the utilities need for long duration storage, especially in that kind of 6 to 12 hour need, to be hitting precisely around 2030, especially for the Western utilities. And so that can match up with the development timeline, given that it can take 7 to 10 years. So I think we do need to send those signals now to get it started. But also on the second question, the role of conventional hydro in a low carbon grid, we actually had a recent NERIS study that looked at this. They looked at the 2050 grid, and they basically modeled it two ways. One, assuming that all existing hydro was just run a river and had no flexibility. And then they ran the model again with the current flexibility that all the hydro assets have. And they found that the existing hydro is going to provide incredible value in a low carbon grid, including lowering total system costs by $3 billion, which is about 3% of the total system cost, reducing renewables, and lowering greenhouse gases. So I think the existing fleet is going to play a vital role. I think it's probably going to be asked to be more flexible than it is being operated today. And we hope that the markets value that flexibility. But I do think that the conventional hydro is going to play an incredible role in 2050.
Thank you, Cameron. Taking quickly another question: which markets are leading pump hydro regulatory policies in the world? Judith, maybe?
Well, there are some which are doing well. I think probably Australia is doing well, but they are specific to the country concerned. So you can't necessarily say that because one country has got it sorted out for itself, that you could copy that and put it in another country and it would still work for them. Traditionally, pumped storage used to work on the basis of arbitrage between the price during the day and the price at night. And in Europe recently, the price differential has been coming down, so which makes it somewhat less profitable to run the pumped storage. Now, 10 years ago, you'd have said that the European system was working fine. So I think that what we have to do is take the best bits of what's working from various places, but fit it to the context of the country concerned rather than trying to replicate something somewhere else.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to conclude, unfortunately, this panel. Lots of good questions still coming, but time is the time. Quick word to wrap up. I mean, as we discussed today, we could see some common trends between all the regions to establish favorable conditions for development of pumped storage. First, assess the need for services to stabilize the grid now. Second, give a stable economic signal, remunerate those services. Third, build visibility for long-term investment in terms of policy and profitability. Fourth, simplify licensing and permitting process to reduce the lead time. And finally, which is probably the most important, act now. Assess the long-term storage need for the future power system now and select the most cost-efficient technologies. I would like to thank you for attending today. I really encourage the audience to participate in the high-level lounge event and findings from the International Forum on Pumped Storage Hydropower that will take place on Thursday, 16th of September. By this date, you will be able to download the reports of the forum and share them widely with your networks. You can also, if you're interested, join the deep dive session of the 2 other working groups on capabilities, cost and innovation, and on sustainability. Last but not least, I would like to remind you that the San Jose Declaration on Sustainable Hydropower will be the statement of this Congress. It identifies a set of principles, recommendations, and commitments to guide new developments and enhance the sector's contribution to the energy transition. If you want to learn more about the San Jose Declaration on Sustainable Hydropower, you can visit the site hydropower.org, where you can download the documents and offer your feedback. Again, thanks a lot for joining today. Thanks to our panelists, and I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.